Hey folks, thanks for joining us with another episode of Data Security Decoded. My name is Steve Stone, head of Rubrik Zero Labs. I'm really excited for each of you to access this content. I had an incredible discussion with Amy Bogac. For those who are not necessarily familiar with her background, Amy is a prominent cybersecurity leader with over 2 decades of experience across IT, OT, and security. She currently serves as the technical advisory board member for Radiant Security, focusing on AI applications for the SOC. Her previous roles include being the CISO for Clorox and also head of information security at CF Industries. Amy and I's conversation ranged across how AI can actually contribute to cybersecurity in really meaningful ways. We talked a lot about her experience leading organizations through breaches to include lessons learned, troubles, and also she had a really fascinating discussion about estate planning and making yourself personally resilient and sustainable going through a multi-week, multi-month incident. And so I just hope everyone enjoys this discussion as much as I did. And as always, we would love to have everyone click on the subscribe button, become a recurring member of this journey for us. And please feel free to leave us reviews. That feedback's important. We want to really make sure that we're making this as useful and as meaningful as it can be for everyone. Thanks again for joining us today. Well, Amy, let me start by first saying thank you for joining us on Data Security Decoded. Really excited to have you here today.
Thanks, Steve. I appreciate you inviting me.
Well, I want to start with what I think is probably the most interesting thing I saw in your background. You are from Chicago, is that right?
I am born and bred in Chicago, spent all my life there until I moved here to North Carolina a few years ago.
Well, I've got a bunch of questions there. I'm a Southern Illinois guy myself. I went to school at Northwestern, went to school at University of Illinois, have been in Chicago a bunch. So right off the bat, the $1,000,000 question, are you White Sox or Cubs?
Southside all the way.
Oh, you're killing me already. I'm a diehard Northsider, diehard Cubs fan. You can change,
Yeah.
You don't have to be a White Sox fan.
Real baseball happens in the South. It's fine.
I love that. Okay, well, I think that's okay. I'm assuming you're Bears and Bulls all the way.
I do enjoy the beer garden at Wrigley Field, though. That is a good place to hang out.
Wrigley Field's great. I love everything about Wrigley Field. And I guess it's okay with the White Sox. Are you more Bears or more Bulls?
Ooh, I'm a Blackhawks fan. Diehard hockey girl.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
So were you watching the NHL finals? Were you rooting for Edmonton or Florida this go around since it wasn't Chicago?
I was looking for the cup to go to Canada. So I was on Team Connor McDavid. So I was a little bummed at the outcome.
Yeah, I was too. No knock on the Florida, but how do you not love the Edmonton story? How do you not love Connor's story? They were just magical. It was so close.
Agreed.
Okay, so Chicago, for folks who haven't been there, big foodie town. What's your favorite go-to restaurant in Chicago?
Whoa, that's a tough one because are they still open? But I do love like the Fulton Market District and Publican is a good place to go.
So good, so good. All right, last Chicago question, then we can get down to the real work. What's your just favorite go-to spot in the city?
The lakefront, right? Anywhere along the lakefront, and just being able to be so close to such great amenities in such an amazing city like Chicago, but to be able to turn around and look at the vastness of Lake Michigan was always like one of my favorite moments.
It's pretty great. I love Lake Michigan. I was in the service. I did a bunch of training time up at Great Lakes Naval Training Center in Chicago. And it always surprises folks that the U.S. Navy does basic training in the middle of the country in basically Chicago. Mm-hmm. But that Great Lake is big.
Yeah. We're going to have to come back to that topic another time, maybe over a beer, because I have so many ties up there to Great Lakes, my husband and I.
Oh, really? My favorite Great Lakes story ever, and this will be the last thing I promise, then we'll get into the cyber stuff. We were doing training up there, and there was a regular Navy basic training class happening, and someone in that class went AWOL. He just wasn't going to do basic training anymore, but never left. He was there for over a year, bouncing between different barracks and just going to the chow hall. So they found some guy that had been living there unattended for over a year, if you can believe that.
That's crazy. It's big, so I'm not surprised by that. But one of my favorite memories of Great Lakes is during the years that they were able to open for the community to come in and do 4th of July fireworks. So we're recording this right before the 4th of July, and that's one of the things that I always think about having moved away from Chicago, is that was one of my favorite places, being on a military base during 4th of July celebration.
Yeah, those are pretty great. Those are pretty amazing. Well, I would like to ask some questions about you. I think you're really interesting. One of the things I love about cybersecurity personally is I think folks, kind of our age and seniority level, the career field's changed a lot. The Wild West
Mhm.
days is typically how it was when we started, and there wasn't really a clear linear path. I look at your background, and I don't want to project too much, but I see something very similar. It looks like you studied communications, you got an MBA, and then you went into some really deeply technical IT roles and then, pivoted towards security later on. So what sparked your interest in technology and pulled you that direction?
I was never afraid of it, right? I think that's one of the things as technology was becoming more and more personal computing, and we began to have access in our personal lives, or maybe in school, and you got to log into your education, your .edu email, right? You could start to touch it and feel it and get used to it, and I was never afraid of it. I feel like there was always people that were cautious about, oh, if I press this button, what's going to happen? The world's going to explode. So for me, that was just part of my journey of being a little bit fearless around technology.
I love that ethos of not being afraid of it because I think that is such a limiter. I've never thought of it in those terms, but I absolutely love that. I'm going to steal that. Just heads up, that's already been cut and copied. Now, you've been on this really interesting journey. Would you do that journey differently now that you're kind of on the other side of it, seniority wise? Are there areas you would have touched or avoided?
Great question. Sometimes it's easier to say the things that I absolutely advocate for, especially new people trying to get into security or dig deeper, build their career further. I absolutely know the things that added value to me, right? Learning and understanding networking at a basic level. I still love to ask the question, do you know the 7 layers of the OSI model, right? So, because I think that gives you basic troubleshooting and helps you create the ability to put things together, puzzle pieces together, when your mind works in a technical way that is intentionally layered like that. There are areas that I didn't have a lot of technical exposure to, but I got some leadership exposure to. Like I just had a conversation today. I am super weak in database, right, and database security, and how databases work, at the granular level. So there are things that I would have done, probably just to make sure I had a deeper technical knowledge or understanding across the board, but it I don't think it ever hurt me as I was moving up in leadership. And there are pivot points in my career that I made some specific choices, right? So saying yes to being involved in Allstate Insurance Leadership Development Program was a key point for me. Choosing to pursue my MBA while I was in a technical role, right? So just kind of adding all the pieces of the puzzle to say, what will this become? I don't know, but I think I want to try all of it, and not saying no to anything.
I think that's just such a powerful approach to things and that's very much been my own career is you say yes and you just never know where you're going to end up. And it's usually somewhere pretty good if you're willing to put the work in along the way. And,
Yeah.
because I would say cyber stock is probably what the kids call it these days, but I did a bunch of research about you to prepare for this conversation. There's a couple of things that I've heard you mention either in articles or other discussions that I definitely want to ask some follow-on questions on.
Great.
One was I was listening to your recent Decipher podcast, which was great, by the way. You had a really interesting discussion there about recovering data and having immutable backups and those being IT 101 basics. Near and dear to our heart at Rubrik, violent agreement on all of that stuff. What I find interesting, and I kind of want to have you stress test our own research on this. One of the things that we've done research on is the realities of that. You're always biased by your customer data. All of our customers have backups. So we've worked a lot with non-Rubrik organizations, thousands of them, to understand, the reality of that. And what we hear is, almost all organizations do have backups. Like 98% of them do, but more than 90% of those organizations struggle to use them. They don't have enough qualified people. They don't have enough data storage. They don't know how it works. The list
Yeah.
is long for reasons. But there's this weird reality of people have backups, but they're not ready to use them. And it's back to this IT 101 comment you have is I think folks say that and spend money to a degree on that, but the operational reality is different from that. So if I could kind of ask you a two-part
Sure.
question, one, does that match your own experience? And two, what are we supposed to do as leaders to deal with that reality that we see?
Yeah, it is basics, right? We used to have all the I's to dot and T's to cross. And when you start your role in operations and you understand, server building and putting together your storage and knowing that you have a backup, right? That the server checklist, right? So when I started in the network operations center at Allstate, that was one of my tasks. I remember is if a server was going to come into production, it was going to be monitored in the NOC. It had to go through the server checklist. And one of them was, is it being backed up, right? So you go through all this checklist, but you're right. There's a concept of, yes, it's backed up, the data's there, but then what, right? I completely agree with you. I think people underestimate the additional storage and capacity and the need to scale if you're going to restore data and how do you bring it back online? There's a lot of it's really hard. I'm going to say this. It's really hard in a production environment to test those processes because you're never going to really take down your production, processing or transactions or what you're doing in order to siphon that off. There's a really tiny bit of my history that I don't know if you caught on to, but there was 2 years I spent at a company called Hewitt Associates, and Aon owns them now, and then they spun them off again, and I think it's called a light or a line now. But that company did backups and data restoration and data failover testing 2 times a year. We would all spend the whole weekend, fail over from one data center to another, go totally black and run, for 24 hours in the alternate data center. And to me, that taught me the value and how really hard it is, because that's the only company I've ever been at that has done it to that extent, right? To go that far, to prove you can operate in your DR state or your backed up state or recovery state. And to me, that was just a fascinating lesson to learn. And it was so long ago. It was like 2006 to 2008. Now I feel old.
My experience matches yours a lot, minus the actual experience in it. So, my background is largely in threat intelligence and breach response, done it across the government and private sector and military. I never touched or even interacted with the concept of backup and recovery until ransomware, which isn't that old. And so I spent the better part of my career. This just wasn't, it just was never even brought up. Yeah. It was always something that a person in IT did, and it was probably buried somewhere. And then I spent, several years watching and working with ransomware events, and you'd see organizations struggle with it. And it's like, well, just do that. It shouldn't be that hard. And then I joined Rubrik, and I spent time really researching this and have really, and it sounds very naive now where I sit, but you really have to experience, like, this is really difficult. This is
hard,
ultimately complex and challenging in the best of situations, and you're never doing this work in the best of situations. Yeah. It's only in bad situations.
Agreed.
To your point about it's really hard to test.
Yeah, it is. It's really hard to test. And if you're not a business that culturally put that process in place, right? I've been at other companies where, you can choose to buy backup, right? You can, when you order a service from IT, you can choose your flavor. Like, do you want good, better, best, right? Are you okay with just your data in one place and you're not backed up? Do you know what that really means? Do you understand the implications? And everybody wants, the best they can get for the cheapest amount. So it's really hard to say, do you understand 6, years later what that decision really meant for you now that the threat landscape has changed so much? And it used to be a compliance checkbox, Steve. The way that I view the kind of the storage and the backup trajectory over the last 20 years that I've seen is unless you were in a company like I talked about with Hewitt, where you were held accountable to making sure you could run in parallel, you would do it because you were required to. Like, it was a compliance step along the way. And I've been in mostly publicly traded companies where your control set, whether or not your auditors cared about your level of maturity in this particular space of IT operations, it changed. There were sometimes it was really important that they wanted to make sure that they saw your DR test and they read your evidence that you actually ran something and had sign off from all your business partners, right? There's a time when the auditors would really look at that. And then then it kind of fell out of favor and it stopped being part of our key controls that, and it became, it's an operational control, but we're not going to worry about it from an audit perspective. And that when you take your foot off the gas for compliance and holding people accountable that they're do what they're saying they're going to do, that tends to fall off in maturity and priority and funding. And that's where you find people today is if you are asked to restore your data, do you really know what that means? Why I talk about this right now, Steve, is because I don't think people understand, and they didn't really dive into their disaster recovery planning until ransomware, like you said, all the way down to tier 0. So there's a lot of disaster recovery planning and a business continuity testing. And, if you're going to do a DR failover, that's great. But there's all these tier 0 assumptions that you have. Like, oh, my other data center is up and running and it's perfectly pristine and fine. And in reality, that's not what happens.
Yep.
So,
we see it every day. I mean, we see it literally every single day.
Yeah. And so, can you recover your tier 0 so you can even think about bringing back your application data?
You talk about how things change over time. And there was another comment I heard in a separate podcast that really just jumped off the page, figuratively, I guess the speaker, literally. You made the comment about IT and OT have to learn to work together. Like the days are done when those are separate and they've got to work together. That really, resonated with me because I spent a lot of my time saying the same thing, both IT and security, particularly in these crisis moments. And the days of IT does this and security does that, in my perspective, those days are gone.
Right.
We can debate if they were ever really here, but they're gone now. And you're in this position where you've had to do all three of those. You've had to really work with IT, OT, and security, which is another layer to it. So I'm really interested in your experience. How do you really bring those disparate entities at times together? How do you actually make these teams work in the same direction or on the same spirit and ethos?
Mm-hmm. It's not a one size fits all, right? Every company is going to be at a different level of maturity. I'm lucky because I absolutely have enormous passion for legacy manufacturing in America. And for me, that means I can go in with passion and ask a lot of great questions of the engineering team on the OT side and get to know them more in a one-on-one space to learn, instead of what maybe 10 years ago was the approach where security says we have to do this. No, and the OT guys would just stand back and say, no, you don't understand. And so I just seek to understand quite a bit more. I spent and invested in my team at becoming certified in OT security just to continue to show that the security team was going to meet you halfway. And that went a really long way for opening those conversations and having more collaborative discussions around technologies. I also think that giving people a place to say, hey, these are decisions we made a long time ago. They're probably not real safe for us now, given that the threat landscape has changed. How can we do this better without spending $1 million? Because OT, tends to really be very cost conscious, especially in manufacturing, when the investment for the manufacturing equipment is already a high value cost. It's probably already been capitalized, and you don't really want to add more because it affects your cost of goods sold. So you have to find ways to be innovative in that space. But giving the OT team a place to bring to you what they know to be today cybersecurity concerns, if they have remote access, kind of jump boxes set up that they did 5 years ago, 10 years ago, because they needed it, and IT was the security of no back then. Give them a safe space to come forward and come clean and build secure bridges for those connections that they need to run operations. Just being real, conscious about it. I also find that the OT teams and the OT manufacturers have spent a ton of time trying to educate our peers on the engineering side of the house. So they're coming to us with a little bit more openness than us just having to kind of provide FUD around, did you see what happened at this shipping, company? Did you see what happened at this transportation company? Did you see what happened to the automotive industry last week, right? There's, we don't have to bring FUD. They're starting to hear it from their own vendors as well. And so just finding a good balance, a way to meet them in the middle, a bridge.
So you've got this really, I'm deeply jealous in some ways. You have this amazing experience in legacy technologies and manufacturing. And then on the opposite end with cutting edge, innovative technologies. Right now today, you're working as a technical advisory member with Radiant Security and AI and improving SOCs, topics that are near and dear to my heart. I've spent years and years in and out of SOCs. Everyone's burned out. Everyone's got alert fatigue. I've never not known those to be true. So I'm really interested in the work you're doing there, and you can't have any discussion and not talk about AI anymore. So I'd like to kind of ask you a couple around AI, and the first would be, what do you think AI really brings to the SOC and security in a meaningful way?
One of the things I love about being security operations focused for as long as I had been in my career is that I love being the human event correlation engine. So if you see something over here, it's going to trigger here, right? And you do it long enough, and you know what the patterns are, or you're able to see and be able to look around you 360 really fast after you have a lot of experience. To me, AI tool in the security operations space is absolutely going to eliminate the need for me to do that, for my brain to do that, and help more companies have access to that same mindset, right? So it's no longer a person anymore. It's that technology that is always going to be spinning their head 360. What else? What else? What else? And for me, I just think that is going to be so innovative. And I think it's going to be really helpful for our teams to continue to grow. That's, I think, one of the biggest challenges for adoption of this technology is how do you build trust that the AI, and when you enable your AI to take action, you have to build trust. I think we're at a point where humans are going to make those judgment calls today, and they're going to not get them right either. And AI is going to probably get them a little bit more consistent, number one, and also hit the button the right way more often than a human would. So I do think adding this layer to a SOC team is going to give everybody a little bit more fighting chance against adversaries that come in on a Friday night and during DEF CON and pull your name out of a fishbowl and, are sitting at an Airbnb with their buddies, kind of having their own capture the flag event at your company's cost.
Yeah, I think that trust element is just such a profound topic for AI in so many ways. And I think if we're being really honest, the industry, we're not helping a lot of things. I mean, there's already AI dissenters and AI doubt, and I'm very much on the forefront of still building this. So as we think about trust and really using AI, how do you, like your advisory hat, in one example, how do you evaluate this is really effective, meaningful use of AI, or like we're just slapping some AI on a thing and now it's a buzzword? Do you have kind of a guidepost that you use to separate those two?
I think the fine line for me is where you let the AI take the action and you're willing to live with the consequence, versus you let the AI alert you and still require the human to take the action. I think that's where we're really going to see value from that. And I think when you look at companies who are fighting the current threat landscape, we have to do it with intelligence, with the artificial intelligence, because we're just not fast enough as an individual, as a team, as a SOC. Tuning our SIM tools, right? Or even using behavior analytics, right? All of these technologies have led us to today. And it's just taking that extra step that says we know that we can pivot and change back. We can, if a configuration change that we made to protect ourselves doesn't work out, we can always undo it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'd rather...
Yeah, we do that now, right?
Yeah,
like that's not a net new motion.
Exactly. So you have to explain that to people. Like, we're going to go ahead and we're going to respond faster because the AI is going to be taking those actions for us. And the same thing is true as you would if a human. We can back that out if it doesn't work out. I would rather back out a bad change than have to rebuild my entire data center.
Yeah, so you mentioned attackers, and that's probably the area I've been most excited to really kind of discuss with you. You've been in a range of roles, lots of experience here. You've dealt with breaches. I would make a safe assumption probably everywhere you've gone, and you've also been the CISO of large prominent breaches. Your own name in the news. You've really seen the gamut of this. In my own experience, with 2 decades being in and around breaches, to include every organization I've ever worked at has been breached. So I've had to go through those same experiences. I find that really is a separator of leaders. Leaders that have been through it and leaders that haven't really just fundamentally think of the world differently. But those are my own experiences. I'd really kind of start. I want to ask a bunch about this, but really kind of starting off with, from your perspective, what has your experience been like being a leader in charge during breaches?
My experiences are varied. It will be easier for me to kind of build up to them, but I remember the first time I decided I would pivot from infrastructure leadership and dedicate my career to security leadership. And it was back in 2010, and we didn't have a name for business email compromise back then, but that's what it was, right? If you had OWA wide open to the world, and phishing was becoming a more prominent attack for credential loss. That to me was the first example of how do I make really fast choices once you get information. And that fearless piece that we talked about at the beginning, and the talk that we just had a little bit about, being able to make decisions and know that you can back out of them. That is what is important during a leadership of an event. Being able to say, this is far enough, we have to push the big red button, or we have to turn off the internet, or we have to stop email routing like I did back in 2010. There's a point of the pain that you have to live through in order to save the greater good. And it's not easy. And if it's not something that you can have conviction of to make that decision and live with consequences of those choices, it might not be the right role for you. And it's okay. You can still have a cybersecurity leadership position and not have that fortitude, but then really train your team for incident handling so that you have that balance of people who know and are trained on when these attacks get, really away from you, and you need to make tough calls. But yeah, business email compromise back in 2010, that was a thing. And turning off global email routing for an international CPG company. Those are tough choices, but they are the ones you have to make. You have to know when it is the right time to make a tough call for the greater good of the organization. There was other red to green events during my career, meaning, and I said this on one of my other interviews, was if you didn't grow up in operations and you didn't understand that the business just wants everything running all the time, right? That seems obvious, but things are down all of the time in a big enterprise. And so if you worked in operations, meaning red to green, you got an alert that something was down and you had to do everything you could to bring it back online. Those are skill sets that you reverse engineer for this, right? Because you're kind of green. It's yellow because there's something going on that you don't understand, and you're going to take it red. That is like counterintuitive to that red to green mentality. So just being able to build trust and have those conversations with people around you and your leadership, that, hey, if we find ourselves in a spot that I don't understand, or it doesn't feel right, or something I can't explain, we're going to take what we need to do and press the button. We're going to pause transactions. We're going to stop working. We're going to potentially cause some production outage. But until we know what we don't know, we're going to do it ourselves instead of let it happen to us. And those are tough calls, and it just takes experience. And if you don't have it yourself, my suggestion, my guidance is hire other people that do. You have to have somebody that has gone through a breach on your team. There's a lot of us out there.
Yeah. So again, there's just a thousand questions. I think your discussion around choices and decisions is it. I mean, that's what this really comes down to. And in my own experience, the first of those really critical decision points, especially for senior leaders, let's say CISOs. I mean, you've literally been in these positions. At some point, that CISO is going to have to make the decision. This is now a big deal. We're going to wake people up. We're going to turn things off. We're going to break things, and this is going to turn into something else the second we start doing that. How have you made those decisions? What have those moments been like for you? And any recommendations you'd have for that soon to be new CISO that it'll be their turn in the seat before they know it?
Yeah. I wish there was a a way to share intuition with people, right? And I think you only gain that from experience, and that's why I advocate for people to get experience in if in that infrastructure layer, right? Be part of an operations team, do a rotation in your network operations team, or spend time there so you understand what it means to have to restore service. I do like that NIST gives us somewhat of a playbook, right? There are some standard tools and tool sets that people in leadership cyber leadership can at least use to have a strategic mindset about how you approach a problem. If you, again, build your checklist, you say my threshold for, or my tolerance really for risk is this. And if an business email compromise happens on one account, I'm probably not going to wake people up. But you have to figure out what that threshold is because it is different in every organization, right? There may be some organizations that have been burned that BEC in one account could drive you to escalate. And I think that's why there's a lot of discussion and a lot of confusion and a lot of variation in how people are applying some of the SEC guidance around materiality because it is very subjective. But just having a playbook and running your playbook and saying, on paper, these are the thresholds that we've defined. It could be length of outage. It could be number of accounts that are involved. It could be number of servers that are involved, number of workstations, right? Build a threshold that says, once we get to 10, I think that's what we use to back it all. So once you get to 10 of anything, you escalate, right? So, start small if you've never done it or if you're building a program from scratch because it really evolves over time, but it also depends on the maturity. And then it depends on what the risk tolerance of your organization and your leadership. I've worked for some very liberal leaders who they're like, that's fine. You got this. I don't need to know. And then I've worked for some very conservative leaders, especially if IT rolls up under finance. They want to know immediately. They have a 0% threshold. They want to know if somebody stubs their toe in a plant. So they have a safety threshold, right? And that's a cool part about manufacturing is that I can partner with my safety partners on the engineering side as well, right? So it's not just the OT engineering guys; it's the safety guys or girls. And those are really strong partnerships. But you get a sense of how the culture is and what the risk level is of an organization because it's really going to vary from place to place.
So I think most people are aware that there's going to be this decision of like, this is a thing. We're now going to cross this threshold. The decision every organization has to make once they do that I think surprises a lot of people is the opposite. At some point, the leaders got to decide this is not a thing anymore. We're shutting it down. We've done the work and we're returning to normal ops. And I've actually seen at least as many struggles there. That decision point tends to really catch organizations unprepared and it lingers and it drags on. So I guess I'd ask you to stress test that again. Has that been your experience? And I would assume that you've had to be that leader making those decisions as well. How have you made those decisions to this event's over, we're moving on to the next thing?
I've had a lot of discussions about that topic, and it really comes down to that pre-planning. Making sure that everybody understands that the life cycle of an event does have a beginning and an end, and we're always going to have extra things to do, right? That the whole point of having a program and being able to do continuous improvement is there's always going to be outputs and be very, very clear. Like, do we need this to happen in order to say we're done? Or is this a continuous improvement item that's going to last longer than a month, last longer than a year, right? Take $1 million, however it is, because any event that you have, you're absolutely going to want to use that and experience and make it better. Never let a good crisis go without getting more money. So, kind of, yeah. And so use that to make sure that you have that pivot point to say, I'm going to put that outside the line, right? Just having clear boundaries around that does not cause us to say the event is over. It does cause us to say we learned more about our environment and this is what we need to do differently to prevent or protect or defend next time. But it isn't about closing out this particular event. I think large scale events that you're seeing right now, and there are so many in the news, not just the one that I experienced with my team. There's a lot that people don't know, won't ever know, and how or why things take as long as they take. Having to secure your environment when you're bringing it back online, right? When you're a publicly traded company, there is a lot of fiduciary check marks to make sure that when you're bringing things back online, that you've made sure that the integrity of the data is there, not just the availability, right? So we talked about backups, and that's one thing to have the availability of the information, but there's also integrity checking that has to go on to make sure that you're bringing the right data back online. It wasn't manipulated. There wasn't anything lost, right? There's key components of that part of the program, and these things do take time. They just do, and those are conversations that I advocate for everybody to have in their next DR or BC conversation to say, this isn't. It's 2024, and history now has told us that cyber events are not hours to recover from; they could be weeks. So everybody just has to start having that discussion. The best I can advocate for my peers or for anybody else that's coming up in security today is prepare everybody that these are not like one-day events, right? They're not going to be tied off with a bow in one day. If it is, that's an alert/event, not an incident. And there's a little bit more to understanding the complexity of our environments today. Steve, one of the things that Rubrik does is protect cloud data, right? Because I guarantee you, we are, in the traditional enterprise sense, we're talking about backups, and we're just talking about our on-prem or VMware environments, right? We haven't even broached the subject of the complexity around integrated systems that talk to the cloud, and then also our on-prem, right? The complexities that we have in our environments today, especially if you're a legacy company, versus a really cool startup who went cloud first natively. That's cool, but that's not what most of our companies are. There's still some combination in the complexities of it. It just has to be escalated, and it has to be something that we're really comfortable talking about, the timing it may take for us to recover from a major event.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right about all of that, and especially the discussions around the complexity of a modern environment. I think one of the things that, at Rubrik Zero Labs, when we look at our research, one of the things that we've had to put an inordinate amount of research on that has frankly surprised me is, really kind of describing the reality of a modern enterprise. There's this mindset of, well, it's on-prem or it's cloud. And it's like, well, every single organization is hybrid off the top. I have yet to see an organization that is on-prem or cloud or SaaS. And even the term cloud, most organizations are multi-cloud. They're multi-cloud vendor. They're not on-prem, they're multi-on-prem. I mean, these are really complicated operational realities. And if I can bridge that, you made an earlier comment that there's no way I can let it go because it's so important. You talk about don't let the money that follows a crisis go to waste. Our most recent research, we effectively were looking at risk. How do you look at risk, before an event? How do you look at risk in a crisis? And then that risk reset. You're coming out of this, you're changing things, and then that's becoming your new steady state. And one of the challenges, very much like the challenge of really having people understand the reality of a hybrid environment and what that means, is the greatest opportunity to affect risk, to really drive change, is exactly what you said. It's that after the crisis. No one wants that to be true. You don't want to be in a crisis, but it happens. And the reality is budgets open up, priorities shift, leaders learn new things. the challenge that we saw in our research was that's just true. We could talk about a million variables that say that coming out of an incident and before the next one, that's where organizations can really fundamentally change who and what they are. The problem is organizations are worn out. The
Right.
last thing they want to do in that window is spend more time on anything to do with that. And so any advice you would have for folks that have to communicate that and also implement that? How do you capitalize on that moment when it's actually the last thing anybody really wants to do? They just want to go home and relax and catch their breath or go back to anything but the breach.
Yeah, it is really hard to do to get a mature team running on all cylinders at the same time. I mentioned previously trying to have somebody on your team that's been trained in incident handling, because the documentation is so key. It's so key about what you've done, the investigation, your post-action report. But it also helps you if you say, like, put an asterisk next to this is money, like put it, like, do it real time when you know that you're making choices and you're making or you're seeing things that you need improvements on. Tick those off while you're going through the event, because then you've got your people are going to ask quickly, how much do you need? And it's better for you to have a parallel checklist running that says, well, I think we need these three things pretty darn quickly. And, when you've thought through that and you have the ability to kind of have somebody running your documentation, keeping things up to date, and you can turn around and say, can you give me that list? It's right there for you. So that I think just takes experience, right? That's not something you can tabletop against. I think it could be something that would be innovative to add to tabletops. Where do we need the money? And then hopefully if you're doing tabletops and you add that piece to your documentation, maybe ask for the money in advance. Say, wouldn't it be cool if we could spend this money proactively instead of reactively? I also am not offended by people using other public breaches, meaning companies that have had to disclose publicly. There's a bunch of us with the early 8Kers, and there are some post 8Kers, post the go live date for disclosure as a publicly traded company anyway. And I think once everybody gets over the post incident life cycle, everyone's are a little bit different, right? We're all going to go through something after the incident gets ramps down. But I've really found a ton of personal value and just advocating for any team that asks me to come and speak to their leadership group so that they can spend money before it happens to them. Right. So I think that's something that I try to do to get back to the community, even when I'm not, working for a specific company anymore. It's being able to share what I've learned, what I wish I knew now that what I wish I knew then that I know now, stories, and advocating for things like, when was the last time you had an Active Directory health check? When was the last time Microsoft looked at your O365 configuration for you? When was the last time you had your VMware and hypervisor infrastructure assessed, right? Configuration drift and configuration or misconfigurations are actually more harmful to organizations than vulnerability management, right? And I'd much rather know
that all day long. I would scream that from the rooftops.
Yep. So those are conversations that I can have, with leadership teams and talk to folks and really just advocate for, this is what you need to be doing to support your team now to avoid, kind of being, put in a tougher position later.
So the last thing I kind of like to ask you about on this topic around, breaches and CISOs and being a leader, it's inevitable to have a discussion about burnout and personal impact. My own team, we put out research a couple of times. It's universal almost. You go through this, it really impacts us as people. It impacts our teams. There's just no way around that. And I think those impacts have really been underrepresented in a lot of ways. I think they're actually much, much larger. And I think we're getting better at talking about that. None of that discussion is new. And none of that, I think, will surprise anybody. You've said and talked about something quite a bit that I've never heard before. And that's, you've talked about estate planning and trying to be sustainable in the middle of these breaches.
Yeah.
And so if you wouldn't mind kind of walking us through that, I'd really like to pick your brain on that, because I've never heard that company's discussions, and I found it, as soon as you said it, like, that's absolutely true. How are we just now talking about this?
Yeah. If you're fortunate enough to not have to go through a major multi-month long, year-long event, however you want to look at it, an extended event, you're not really thinking about the same thing we just talked about, where you're telling your leadership team that it may be weeks, right? I don't think we ever planned for that, even within our own recovery teams. I mean, yeah, I think people that have done operations know how to start to rotate people quickly, right? You get 3 shifts and you rotate people quickly. Um, what after you get to like a week, people's brains just start shutting down, right? And having in your incident response plan, who would be your backup for you is not something that I've ever seen in a tabletop exercise, right? Like, who's going to be your backup? Oh, it's going to be, this guy who is, or this girl who is, my right hand or my left hand. And the reality is they've been with you for the whole 7 days also. So, having on paper who you would bring in as a third party trusted partner that could come in and, shift, alternate with you is really important. And planning that up front wasn't something we did. It was something we adapted pretty quickly, and it made a huge difference for me. And the team that did that for my team knows they're out there and knows that I, appreciate them without fail, because we could not have gone 22 days straight without that type of rotation, without that type of support from the partner that we brought in. But then, we're definitely, we're planning for having somebody living at our data center for 33 days and never seeing their family. I mean, there is a personal impact to major events like this. And, we are all in it. We are all in it because we all care enough about the environment that we're built, that we're protect. And nobody wants to go home, right? It was harder to get people to go home when I was telling them to go home than it
Isn't that the
was.
truth? You're absolute.
Yeah.
I've seen that 100% of the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. And so just like having a good plan that says you're never going to be there for more than 7 days, because your brain can't actually do that, right? It may take us longer because you're slowing down, right? And it isn't that you're slowing down because you don't care. It's slowing down because your brain needs a rest. It needs a break. And so, those things are important. For me, the event that I went through with Clorox, I'll never be able to separate the personal and the professional. I lost my dad suddenly, like 3 weeks into our event, and that changed me personally. It changed me professionally. And it's why I advocate for having these better plans, better human capital, better people planning in your event planning. But on the personal side, it's also, protect your legacy and make sure that, if you are, no matter how much money you have in the bank, it doesn't matter if you are starting your savings journey or at the end towards your retirement and you want to protect that. If you don't have your estate plan updated, and if something happened to you and you didn't have the ability to, right, you don't want to give somebody a mess, right? I love my dad. I lost my mom 9 months prior to that. And so there was a compounding event for us, but and I know he didn't mean to leave us in this situation, but he didn't have a will. He didn't have an estate plan. He did not have my sister and I set up as beneficiaries. And back to our Chicago conversation, Illinois might be the most difficult place to go through probate court and
Isn't that the truth?
have to take that step and really, kind of close out that journey. So it makes the process, it's harder to grieve, it's harder to process, it's harder to have fond memories when you want to have those memories. And so I really advocate, like, look at yourself 360, have your professional contacts that you would call if you needed help, have your professional, like a incident response plan for yourself as a person and in your professional life. But my big ask is that everybody needs to have some type of estate planning set up. Either make sure your beneficiaries are really tight and they're everywhere, which I guarantee you nobody is that good, or have, an estate plan in place so that your family doesn't have to add some additional headache to the already tough grieving process.
Well, I really appreciate your openness on that personally and professionally, because that was when I hear you speak about those things, it's just I could think of easily 100 examples in my own career, and everyone I know is in the same boat. So I'm genuinely appreciative that you've been able to really kind of, I think, bring that particular thing forward, because I've never not seen it be an issue that has to get managed. For these events that go on for weeks and months, that it will happen. Life will carry on, and often
Yep.
in very difficult ways.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you mentioned legacy. If I can shift gears a little bit, one of the things that is very apparent throughout your career is work around representing and really trying to bring to the forefront underrepresented communities. You work a lot with women in cybersecurity and other groups like that, a topic that we discuss a lot here on this show in particular. And there's a bunch of questions we could have there, but the one that I would really like to ask you is, in your experience with that, what are the things that really drive meaningful change? How do we actually push these topics forward versus just talk about them?
Yeah, I really appreciate that. One of the things that has really changed me in how I talk about answering this question is having an understanding about your personal biases is so important. And you may say, "Oh yeah, I read a book or I went to a class because my HR team added this to our list of cultural or DNI goals for us to take this class on understanding biases." But it's a skill. It's a skill set for you have to grow and build and nurture to understand your biases, because just going through one training class may awaken you, but it isn't going to change your behavior. So I think that, and I've advocated for this also, like, I think that understanding biases is a training class that is as important as cybersecurity training or code of conduct training, because it is something that changes in you. It's something that you have to evolve, and it's a muscle you have to flex. So that's the first thing about it that I would ask for everybody to really think about if they want to continue to expand the diversity of their teams. I had a really interesting conversation recently, and I was grateful that I had the opportunity to share this with somebody, and they had a moment of aha in front of me that was really kind of cool. But it's a super easy example. If you have two resumes, and one is a diverse candidate, and one is what would not be considered maybe not diverse, but we'll just say it that way. All things being equal was what this person said to me. All things being equal, I'm going to take the person that is best fit for the job. And I said to them, I understand that, and that's a natural tendency to say, and I've heard it 100 times, and I've probably said it myself. All things being equal, I'm going to pick the best person for the job. And it might be the person that is not the diverse candidate because they have more experience. And I said, well, maybe the alternate candidate that doesn't have as much experience doesn't have it because they are being deselected in this way, right? Like, think about that's a bias in and of itself. Right? Just to say all things are equal. It doesn't matter. I just want the best person for the job. The folks that are trying to get additional experiences that maybe aren't that are overlooked or have biases that they're struggling against, think about it in that way. It's just that simple. Like, that person may not have 6 years of experience and they have 5. The other candidate has 6. Well, that person may have been left behind, right? Overcoming diversity challenges in corporate America today means you have to give those candidates a chance to catch up. And I don't think that was the aha moment this person had with me, was they never looked at it that way.
It's interesting to say that. I've very much been the other person in this scenario. I mean, there's been a distinct moment early in my career where a very senior mentor of mine, and we were having virtually this discussion about hiring. We have, a diverse candidate and, let's say, a typical candidate, for lack of a better term. And this discussion was, well, let's go with the most experience. And I will never forget, and I'm really kind of saying some of the same things you're saying here, but she said to me, experience in what? Experience in what? And she's like, we're talking about 1 less year of experience in this technical thing, but 10 more years of experience in, and then that discussion, that immediate, those 2 words,
Yeah.
in what, shifted everything for me and has really stuck with me. So I'm excited to hear, you largely say those same things, and because I think they're really powerful and really true.
They are.
Well, I know we're over time, and I could ask you just endless questions, but we've kind of stumbled into a last question for all of our guests, and it's really become one of my favorite parts. Everyone we've spoken with has been senior. People of a certain vintage, is the way I kind of say it for those of us our age and our career paths. There's this kind of question of having seen everything you've seen, all the struggles, all the challenges, the wins, the losses. Are you more excited or more pessimistic as you look forward? Do you think the next 5 years will be better or worse than, let's just say, the previous 5 years, the previous 10 years? Your choice for time frame.
Here's how I'm going to answer that. I think it is very exciting for everybody right now. I think even some of the experience that I've had, or maybe I call it a roller coaster. It's been a roller coaster. Um, there are choices that you get to make personally along the way, along the path. I often speak to the women that I mentor and advocate with around being intentional and having goals and getting to a place of, what do you want next? Sitting around waiting for what's going to happen to you next isn't necessarily being intentional about helping to drive your career. So what do you want next? Be intentional.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had to kind of reassess and take that to heart over the last year. And being intentional doesn't always have to mean I want the next best thing. Like I want the next role. I want to keep growing. Growing higher doesn't mean the same thing to me as it did a year ago. Right? Growing personally and professionally can also mean choosing to understand your own personal risk, like having your own personal risk profile. We talk about this a lot in the enterprise world. Like the company has to have a risk profile, like risk tolerance, right? And that helps you spend money. It helps you make trade-offs. It helps you drive exceptions. And that's kind of where I'm at today is, how do you have your own personal risk tolerance or personal risk profile? And where do you want to go with that next? I think it is very exciting. I think there are a lot of great people who are willing to take big leaps, and they're going to be the next evolution of our cybersecurity leaders. I think that I can still add value in great organizations that maybe are not publicly traded, privately held. The world of the world of CISOs is very diverse, but I think there's an opportunity for me to take a different risk approach right now. And that doesn't mean that I am any less passionate about what I'm doing. It doesn't mean that it's any less important to be a CISO at a publicly traded company versus a privately traded one. But I do think it's kind of innovative, and it's going to help. People are going to have to make that choice, especially as you see, the SEC take a stronger position against publicly traded companies and, the impact to shareholders on big breaches.
Well, Amy, this has been absolutely enjoyable. I've loved every minute of this. We really appreciate you joining us, and thank you again for your time today.
Thanks, Steve. I appreciate you including me. It's been great.